What is the infinite game and what is a finite game? What game are we playing?
So in the mid-1980s, a philosopher and theologian by the name of Dr. James Carse defined these two types of games, finite games and infinite games. A finite game is defined as known players, fixed rules, agreed upon objective. Football, baseball, right? If there's a winner, necessarily there have to be losers, but more important, there's always a beginning, a middle, and an end. And then you have infinite games. Infinite games are defined as known and unknown players, which means you don't necessarily know who all the other players are, and new players can join whenever they want. The rules are changeable, which means every player can play however they want. And the objective is to stay in the game as long as possible, to perpetuate the game. We are players in infinite games every day of our lives, whether we know it or not. No one in here will ever win healthcare. No one will ever win education. No one will ever be declared the winner of your marriage. And there's definitely no such thing as winning business. And yet when we listen to the language of so many people in business, it becomes very, very clear they don't know the game they're playing. They talk about being number one, or being the best, or beating their competition. Based on what? Based on what agreed upon metrics, timeframes, and objectives. And this is a problem, because when we play with a finite mindset in an infinite game, when we play to win in a game that has no finish line, there are some very predictable and consistent outcomes. The big ones are the decline of trust, the decline of cooperation, and the decline of innovation. Like when Circuit City went bankrupt, Best Buy didn't win anything, right? And so we have to play for the game that we're in. And if you're in business, to stay in business, versus if you want to just hit some target and get out of it and you don't actually care if the business does good work, then you have to play for the mindset for the game you're playing.
There's no such thing as winning or losing in an infinite game. What happens is when the player or one of the players runs out of the will or resources to continue to play, they drop out of the game. But the game continues with you or without you. Problems arise, however, when you pit a finite player versus an infinite player. Because finite players are playing to win, and infinite players are playing to keep playing, and they'll make very different strategic choices as a result. And this is what happened to America in Vietnam. America was fighting to win, and the North Vietnamese were fighting for their lives. And they would fight to the very last man if necessary. And when a finite player finds themselves against an infinite player, they will always find themselves in quagmire, racing through the will and resources to stay in the game. So this gets me thinking. We are surrounded every day of our lives by infinite games. We are all unwitting players in these infinite games. There's no such thing as being number one in marriage. There's no such thing as winning in your friendships. There's no such thing as winning global politics, and there's definitely no such thing as winning business. But if we listen to the language of too many leaders, they don't know the game they're in. They talk about being number one, being the best, beating your competition, based on what agreed upon metrics, based on what agreed upon timeframes. Meaning, the vast majority of our businesses, even of our political leaders, are playing by finite rules in an infinite game, which means we're racing through the will and resources to stay in the game. In business, we call it bankruptcy or merger and acquisition. Which means we need to completely readjust how we think about leadership to actually play for the game we're in. And the reason is important, because when we play with a finite mindset in the infinite game, there's a few very predictable things that happen. There's a decline of trust, there's a decline of cooperation, and there's a decline of innovation.
The closest thing to leadership is parenting. You have to be an infinite student of parenting. You know, you want to be a parent, you ask your friends, you ask your own parents, you join groups, you read magazines, you watch talks, whatever it is, you're constantly consuming how to deal with this constantly changing challenge of being a parent. And it's ups and downs and successes and failures, you know, and that's what it is. Leadership is the same. Leaders, great leaders are students of leadership, no matter how achieved they may be. They're still learning. And it's a lifestyle. It's the lifestyle of what I need to do to look after people, which includes things like listening, learning how to give and receive feedback, learning how to have effective confrontations, how to discipline when necessary in a way that's constructive, roam the halls, get to know people, learning what it means to ask somebody questions. How do you ask questions? You know, like some people are naturally good at being curious about other human beings, and some people are uncomfortable because they're introverts or whatever. socially awkward, but we can learn. You know, how do you learn to remember people's names? Oh, I'm bad at names. No, you've just decided you're bad at names. We can learn to be good at names so that when we walk down the hall and say, hey, Tom, oh my God, he remembers my name. It's a nice feeling. It's a lifestyle. It's a lifestyle. There are many, many things we have to do and constantly work on to be a great leader to create that environment.
The infinite game is not the absence of finite games. It's the context within which those finite games exist, right? So let me give you a better analogy. We overuse sports analogies in business. Sports is always a beginning, a middle, end. Business not necessarily. Here's a better analogy. Let's say you want to be healthy. So I know there's many things you have to do. You have to exercise, you have to eat right, you have to nurse your personal relationships, get sleep. You'll never be good at all those things all the time. It's a striving. But there's nothing wrong with setting arbitrary goals. There's nothing wrong with setting quarterly or annual goals for your business. There's no problem with that. Like, I want to lose X amount of weight by X date. Great. You do all the things you're supposed to do. You stand on the scale every day. We love a metric. Human beings need metrics. You can't run a marathon without mile markers, right? It's actually unnerving. So we like to measure things because it tells us speed and distance. And sometimes it goes well and sometimes it goes badly. And let's say you hit your goal by the right date on the right time. Ecstatic. But here's the problem. You have to keep doing it for the rest of your life. The game's not over. But what I think is more interesting is what happens if you miss your goal, right? What happens if you don't lose the weight on the right day, on the right time? Well, the answer is nothing. Nothing happens. Nothing happens. In fact, you're way healthier now than when you started because you've been doing all the right things. You just got the date wrong. And we do the same thing in business, right? You can pick an arbitrary number to hit, usually at the end of the year because that's when we pay taxes, and you can strive towards that. And if you're doing the right thing and building a healthy business, if you hit your goal, great, it'd be ecstatic, but keep working at it. But if you miss your goal, the question is, what's the trend? And I think we need to pay more attention to not only if we hit the goal, but how we hit the goal. Did you do it ethically, or did you do it by stabbing people in the back, cutting corners, cutting quality to drive margin? That helped you hit a few goals, but over the long run, you're going to do damage to the business. Or are you building it in a healthy way? You just got the wrong date and you got the wrong time. You're striving to build a healthy business. And so if somebody's working to build that business, are you going to sell a business that's healthy and somebody else can continue to run and that business will continue to do good in the world? Or do you just want to cash out and make your money and you'll put lipstick on the pig and you don't care? If you're just trying to put lipstick on the pig, that's a finite mindset. And I don't know what you've built, but I guarantee you it'll be worth less than if you built a really healthy business that someone can take along and nurse once you're gone.
Very good.
In other words, infinite mindset still counts.
I had a real life experience that showed me what the difference between the two games was. I spoke at an education summit for Microsoft. I also spoke at an education summit for Apple. At the Microsoft Summit, I would say that 70 to 80% of the executives spent about 70 to 80% of their presentations talking about how to beat Apple. At the Apple Summit, 100% of the executives spent 100% of their presentations talking about how to help teachers teach and how to help students learn. One was obsessed with where they were going, the other one was obsessed with beating their competition. Guess which one was in quagmire? Guess which one was racing through the will and resources to stay in the game? At the end of my talk at Microsoft, they gave me a gift. They gave me the new Zune when it was a thing. This was Microsoft's answer to the iPod. This little piece of technology was absolutely fantastic. The user interface was simple. It was easy to understand. It was elegant. It worked flawlessly. It was a brilliant little piece of technology. I'm sharing a taxi with a senior executive from Apple after the Apple talk, and I couldn't help myself. I just had to stir the pot. So I turned to him and I say, Microsoft gave me their new Zune. It is so much better than your iPod Touch. And he looks at me and he says, I have no doubt. And the conversation was over. Because an infinite player understands that sometimes you have the better product and sometimes they have the better product. And there's no such thing as winning or being the best. There's only ahead and behind. And the only true competitor in an infinite game is yourself. The goal is to make a better product this year than you had last year, to ensure that your culture is stronger this year than it was last year, that your leaders are growing at a stronger pace this year than they were last year, that everything about your organization, your systems, everything is improving, improving, and improving. It's constant improvement. There is no end to this game. It's a game of constant improvement.
This is one of the problems with, I think, our modern business today, which is too much of business is run right now with an excessive amount of finite thinking. Now, there are always finite games within the infinite game. The infinite game, however, provides the context. And without that infinite mindset, all you have is win, 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 which is unsustainable. An infinite game is not a series of finite games. It's unsustainable because nobody has that energy and there's no such thing as a perfect growth chart. It doesn't exist.
Why isn't an infinite game just a series of finite games?
For the same reason you can't just keep eating chocolate cake every day because it feels good. Because simply driving people gets exhausting. It destroys the foundations of trust. It destroys the foundations of cooperation. And when we don't work well together, share information, admit mistakes, there's no innovation.
If we have to completely reconfigure how we think about leadership for the infinite game, it begs the question, well, how are we supposed to lead in the infinite game? There are 5 things that have to happen to really become a leader for the infinite game. 1, you have to have a just cause. 2, you have to have trusting teams. 3, you have to have a worthy adversary. 4, you have to have existential flexibility. And 5, you have to have the courage to lead. Just cause. A just cause is a purpose or cause that is so just you would willingly sacrifice to be a part of it. It doesn't have to be sacrifice your life, but you would turn down a higher paying job because you'd rather stay here and be a part of what you're doing now. It means that you willingly work late hours or go on business trips or maybe not see your family as much. You don't like it, but it's worth it. It feels worth it. That's what a just cause is. There are many great just causes out there. Apple was founded on the premise that individuals should be able to stand up to Big Brother. That's why they're so appealing to creatives and young people, people who like the idea of standing up to Big Brother. The United States wrote in the Declaration of Independence, all men are created equal, endowed with these unalienable rights, amongst which include life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is an ideal. Just causes are a description of a future state so ideal that for all practical purposes we will never actually achieve that vision, but we will die trying. That is the point. This is what gives our lives and our work meaning. That it's not about simply achieving some sort of metric, hitting some sort of goal that has no purpose, but rather that every goal we hit is a marker that we're making progress towards something even bigger. It's about momentum, not about absolutes. Yes, metrics are very, very important. They help us count speed and distance. And every milestone we pass makes us feel like we're getting closer and closer, which re-energizes that we can do this, we can do this. You have to have a just cause.